Welcome to the Monster News Report. This is Nick Adam Poling. In this show, we'll be working with G-fans to take on the critical issues and subjects you've been wondering about. Today, we'll be discussing timelines. More specifically, the Showa era of Godzilla films, 1954 through 1975. This is the period in time that began it all for our favorite monster. Do all of the films exist in the time period of their release dates? Some do, some do not. To shed light on this subject is Yuri Rentfro.
How's it going?
Doing great.
Alrighty, there's a few questions that came up for me when I first took on this report. I had no idea what kind of can I was opening. This has changed the way I personally view all the Godzilla movies, but it also raises a lot of questions about the making of the movies all through the 50s, 60s, and 70s that we may honestly never get answers to. We'll just start off, I'll go through each movie, make my case for each one, and then at the end we'll shuffle everything together and try to get it all into one timeline. I say try, we'll see how it goes. We'll start off with the first movie, original, 1954. Next one, we'll go on to Godzilla Raids Again. Direct sequel to Godzilla, actually has one of the only reoccurring characters from the Showa era, so it's safe to say that one follows the original. King Kong vs. Godzilla. Godzilla comes out of an iceberg, directly from being frozen in Godzilla Raids Again. Okay, that makes sense to me. Ends with Godzilla and King Kong falling into the water. Mothra vs. Godzilla, he washes up on a beach. I can kind of make a case of that one following that one. Ghidorah's Great Monster. This is where things start to get a little more interesting because you really have to use your imagination and just kind of absorb each movie kind of as its own entity, but kind of pay attention to what happened beforehand. Because in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, I mean, we don't have like what we have today, where you have the Marvel Cinematic Universe where they do a press conference and they lay out the movies for the next 15 years. How did Toho view Godzilla? Did they view him as a character or did they view him as an actor? How did they enter each movie? Did Fukuda, Honda have a planning meeting before each movie saying, okay, well, here's what happened in the previous movies. Do we need to add a new monster in and then go from there? Or was it basically, here's a budget, here's some monsters, good luck? Mr. Sekizawa would probably be a really good person to ask that question to, but unfortunately, we may never get answers like this. With that being said, we will move on to Ghidorah and all throughout the 60s, because this is where it starts to get really interesting. Of course, 1964, Ghidorah's Great Monster starts off with Godzilla swimming with whales. Well, he did fall in the ocean at the end of Mothra vs. Godzilla, so I can go with that. Mothra is already an established character, and they know about Infinite Island, they know about the fairies. The fairies are celebrities now, which kind of makes the case of that being a follow-up to Mothra vs. Godzilla, or even the original Mothra. We kind of actually have continuity between those movies. Not only that, but Rodan comes out of Mount Aso, which is where he was entombed in the original Rodan. So we may actually have continuity there. That actually makes more sense to me than probably it should. There we go on to Monster Zero. The movie itself starts off 196X is what it says in the little prologue there at the beginning. Okay, that could be 1960s. Doesn't say exactly when in the 60s, but it says 60s. Godzilla sleeping in a lake. Rodan sleeping in a mountain. Well, they were both waving bye to Mothra while being in Japan at the end of Ghidorah's Great Monster. So that makes sense. I can go with that. Now, Godzilla vs. Sea Monster. This is where things start to get really interesting. Or amusing, depending on your point of view. The movie itself ends with Godzilla swimming away. Where was Godzilla swimming to? The next movie is Sunk Godzilla, which is where Godzilla's swimming in the middle of a storm going to an island. That makes sense to follow Ebirah, the sea monster. There's a character in the movie named Dr. Matsumiya, which had passed away. His daughter lives on Soul Island. I tried really hard to make this a futuristic movie, but both watching the teacher dub and then the Japanese version of the movie, he had left a diary when he passed away. And it says Soul Island, 1955. And well, Reiko or Psycho, depending on which version you watch, she's probably early to mid-20s. Darn, I can't make this a futuristic movie now because 1955 is thrown in there. Okay, cool. Well, we're just going to go from that one on to the next one, which is Destroy All Monsters. Starts off saying 1999. Minya's still a baby. This is where we know from listening to audio commentary and stuff like that, well, you know, these suits here are what we have. We're going to make a really good movie with a lot of monsters, and they're still in good condition. But I'm trying to view these as, let's not listen to audio commentary or interviews. Let's just view the movie for what it is and try to piece it all together. It brings up the question, was Minya fully developed when he was cracked open by Kamacuras? It's really hard explaining the non-aging Minya. I mean, does he require a lot of amount of radiation like Godzilla Jr. did to develop? Or was it another Minya? We may never know. This also introduces Gorosaurus, who was in, of course, King Kong Escapes, but it's also the first time in the continuity that we see him. From that movie, we're going to go on to Godzilla's Revenge, which is, we're going to ignore the stock footage and just go with what's there. And, of course, following some amazing audio commentary, which just sheds all new light on that movie for me. It's all in the dream of a boy who's grown up watching Godzilla movies. So we're just going to take that one and set it to the side for a moment. And go on to Hedra. This is another movie that has, like, no direct ties to any other Godzilla movie. It's almost like it's its own little entity by itself. We'll set that one over by the side. Go on to Godzilla vs. Gigan, which is another one that actually makes quite a bit of ties to other movies without bringing up the whole stock footage question. Monster Island is mentioned on there and established, and they mentioned that Godzilla and Anguirus are breaking out of Monster Island. Okay, well that makes a lot of sense of that time somewhere close to Destroy All Monsters. Of course, they showed the Gorosaurus and the other monsters on there, so Gorosaurus, Mothra, Kamacuras, so we know that Monster Island is established. From there, we're going to go on to Godzilla vs. Megalon. All the monsters are still on Monster Island, and we have Gigan. So the Seatopians call for Gigan for backup to help Megalon. That makes sense that that's a direct sequel to Godzilla vs. Gigan. Okay, got that established, but there was no Minya in it. We're just going to step over to the next movie, which is Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. No mention of Monster Island. Both Godzilla and Anguirus just seem to be appearing, especially at the beginning of the movie, in a mountain and in like the snowy area there. The next movie will go on to Terror Mechagodzilla. Mentions Rodan and Manda. Manda wasn't a part of the Godzilla continuity until Destroy All Monsters, but it also is a direct sequel to Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. Okay, so we got these little pods of movies that one is a sequel to the other, to the other, to the other. Can we try to place it all together in one continuity? That is what we're going to try to do right now. I'm going to go crazy Newton Geisler here from Pacific Rim. I may be completely crazy, but this is the continuity that makes the most sense to me. Godzilla 1954, the original. Godzilla raids again. King Kong versus Godzilla. And somewhere in and around there you can put in Rodan and Mothra, because they seem to mesh really well with this. Where Atragon, Mysterians, other ones, they may or may not fit. After King Kong versus Godzilla, go with Mothra versus Godzilla, because one seems to lead right to the other, right to the other, right to the other. Then Ghidorah's a three-headed monster. Monster Zero, as Samuel L. Jackson would say, hold on to your butts. Godzilla vs. Hedra. We know that Monster Zero is in the 60s. Doesn't say when in the 60s. It could be the end of the 60s. We're going to throw Hedra in there because there's no direct tie to any other Godzilla movie. Right after that, we're going to put Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. Once again, no other ties to any other one. It could take place in the 70s. We really don't know. Son of Godzilla, Godzilla vs. Gigan, Godzilla vs. Megalon. By the sheer point that at the beginning of Godzilla vs. Megalon, it says in early parts of 1971, the atomic test in the Illusion Islands. Okay, well darn, that's in the 70s. That's got to take place before Destroy All Monsters. Then we're going to do Destroy All Monsters. Godzilla's Revenge, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, and Terror Mechagodzilla. If we've tried to do a continuity with the Showa era, this kind of makes sense to me. Because if we go in chronological order, I can't see Megalon or Mechagodzilla being futuristic by going by what people are wearing and the cars that they're driving. But Godzilla's Revenge will put in there right after Destroy All Monsters because it's kind of its own entity. It's in its own separate universe.
Now, Yuri, let me ask you this. Do you believe that the films after the Showa era of Godzilla films exist all in the same timeline?
That is a very good question, and that's what I tried to piece it together the best I could. Because if you look at the way that they were made, I have a hard time believing that they were made with the idea of taking into mind the previous movies. They may have, they may not have. We'll never know. But if I've tried to piece everything together in its own continuity and its own little line, this is the best way I could do it.
We appreciate your time, Yuri, in making this confusing subject a little bit more confusing.
Yes. Thank you.
Now, what do you think? Leave a comment in the section below telling us your thoughts on this topic, or maybe a subject for a future episode. But for now, it's time for breaking news. Alright guys, according to some sources, Hideaki Anno announced a sequel to both Shin-Godzilla and Evangelion. But pay attention here. His announcement may have been misinterpreted or mistranslated. According to August Ragone, and I know him to be a credible source, excitement for a sequel may be premature considering this may be an announcement simply to gain publicity for the upcoming Godzilla Monster Planet. We'll keep watching for official news from Japan or other credible sources. Also in G-Fest news, Kazuhiro Nakagawa, assistant director on Shin-Godzilla, has been added to the guest list for G-Fest this July. He'll be joining Shinji Higuchi, visual effects director of Shin-Godzilla, Michiro Ochima, composer of some of the Millennium series Godzilla films, Yuji Kaida, designer and illustrator of kaiju art found on model kits and posters, and many more guests that keep getting added. Follow G-Fest on Facebook, or go to GFan on Twitter, or go to their website, gfan.com, for more updates. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Monster News Report, and I'll leave the last word for Yuri.
Oh, Godzilla, what terrible language!